This is Marco Reus.
This is Shinji Kagawa.
This is Nuri Shahin.
Hello, this is Jadon Sancho.
And you're listening to the Yellow Wall podcast.
Hello and welcome to episode 481 of the Yellow Wall Pod. I'm your host of Butzko, and today we will talk about the dashing of our dreams, Borussia Dortmund losing in the Champions League final 2-0 against Real Madrid. Here with me to commiserate is Lars Pollmann. Hello Lars, how are you doing?
Hello Stefan, I guess it's the Yellow Whale podcast today.
Yeah. I feel like I'm starting to mumble every time I'm saying Yellow Wall Pod. But yeah, Lars, I knew this was gonna happen this way when Dortmund were playing PSG, and you said, "Well, I'd rather lose in the semifinal than in the final," knowing this club would find a way to inflict maximum pain on us. So yeah. Looking at my notes, they're non-existent because obviously I don't really want to delve into this game to any extent as much as I need to. But Lars, I guess we should begin maybe a little bit with the occasion itself and just, I guess, note that Borussia Dortmund fans were at Wembley in full force, that the occasion... The final itself, I thought was pretty swell, and having a good representation of the black and yellows and the sheer greatness of our club that we all love on full display in the Champions League finals. So I think before we say anything else, Real Madrid are by most accounts the biggest club in the world, but they were completely owned by the yellow fan base. Obviously, that does not guarantee you a trophy, but it's still nice to know how big of a fan base Borussia Dortmund have, what an active fan base Borussia Dortmund have, and how this team and this club is overall pretty cool, and I'm very glad to be a Dortmund supporter. That all being said, Lars, I don't know if you want to add to this or not.
What I say is that Real Madrid are in the Champions League final, I don't know, 3 years out of 5, and for Dortmund
Yes.
it's been the third time ever. So while it's obviously great for Dortmund to show up in force with a lot of fans, and the stadium being in their control until the goal anyway, I kind of give Real Madrid's fans a bit of a pass on that, because if it's basically every year or every other year that your club reaches the pinnacle of European club football, and it's only natural that you don't make every single trip and spend I don't know how much money on tickets and flights and all that. But obviously that doesn't take away anything from the showing the Dortmund supporters gave. I think the tifo was great. I think the support during the game was great. A nice showing, especially in the motherland of football, as England likes to call itself. That to remind everyone how fan culture can look, because obviously in the Premier League it's pretty much that is at this point.
Yeah, for sure. Now, Lars, let's talk about the game.
Yay.
Yeah, yoo-hoo. And I must say, for what it's worth, you can also be relatively proud of how Dortmund played, especially in the first half. What made Dortmund play so well that they created better chances in the first 45 minutes, and we can all now sit here and argue about how they coulda, shoulda won. Obviously, chances weren't taken, but still, Dortmund had the surplus of chances anyway. What made them so strong compared to Real before the break?
I don't know that there's a deep tactical analysis. If there is, maybe I'm just not susceptible to it. I just kind of feel like Real Madrid probably drank the Kool-Aid a bit before the game. Were a bit too sure of themselves, given the huge discrepancy in, I don't know, level of expectation or whatever, between them, being pegged as the massive favorites, and Dortmund, and as we talked about before the final, basically being quite happy to make it this far. And sort of the game kind of developed as we, in a somewhat optimistic preview, mentioned might happen in that Dortmund are quite happy to be, the underdogs in the Champions League. They don't want too much off the ball. I think, especially in the first, 30 minutes or so, I think the statistic that was shown on German TV was Real had like 2/3 or whatever of possession, and that was obviously the kind of game that was conducive to Dortmund being in it, because they were obviously not going to dominate on the ball. That's just not how the two sides match up. I don't know that anyone would have expected Dortmund to be the more assured in possession or whatever. And then obviously the biggest issue for Madrid before the game, as mentioned repeatedly by Carlo Ancelotti, was that they were quite scared of Dortmund in transition phases, and obviously that's sort of what happened from time to time. Dortmund broke, whether that was the great pass by Hummels breaking lines for Adeyemi for the biggest chance of the game, in my opinion, or whether that might have been a counter here or there. So the game basically developed as best as Dortmund could have hoped in the first half, and obviously they didn't take any of their chances, which is the big letdown. But I sort of don't like the narrative that Dortmund wasted, 3 or 4 sitters or whatever, and that they should have been up by 3 goals at halftime. Even I think even Jude Bellingham said that, but he will not have known, for example, that Füllkrug was offside for the chance when he hit the post. I think that was pretty obvious, so that wouldn't have counted. I think there was another offside chance. The shot from distance from Sabitzer, that's not a great chance. That's just a shot that every good goalkeeper in the Champions League final will save, and Courtois obviously is more than just good. There was the chance from Brandt that might have been actually the second offside one, if memory serves. So basically you had the Adeyemi 1-on-1 where I'm pretty sure he just was caught in two minds, had too much time to think, made a wrong decision. That can happen. Obviously it's annoying that happens in the Champions League, and pretty early on, when that might have made a difference. Although I think we all know that Real Madrid are the kind of team that can take a hit on the chin and basically still be Real Madrid. I don't know that going down would have changed the game too much for them. And then you also had the double chance basically when Adeyemi shot from the tight angle, and then Füllkrug tried to lash onto the header but couldn't contort his body correctly. I think if Adeyemi opens up the field of vision, he might be able to pick out Füllkrug in the middle, who obviously would have had a much better scoring chance. But I mean, it's not like even the expected goals, I think at halftime was like 1.8 for Dortmund or whatever, but that for example included the hitting of the post by Füllkrug in an offside position, so even that is kind of skewed. So
I mean, this is also skewed because Adeyemi's shot on the 1-on-1 against Courtois was obviously a way lower expected goal value than it should have been, considering the chance he had. But yeah, you're right. I think if you subtract the Füllkrug chance where he was obviously offside, I think the value for Dortmund is much lower. Yeah,
and I mean, obviously XG is a cumulative score, so I mean, if Dortmund have 5 or 6 decent enough scoring opportunities, the XG will look pretty impressive. But as I said before, I don't think it was a case of them missing a lot of sitters, which has also happened. Like, for example, in the games against PSG, I think both sides actually kind of missed a number of huge chances, and it wasn't the case. It was the one Adeyemi moment that might have changed the game, but as I said before, I think Real Madrid are probably the one team, especially in the Champions League final, for whom going down probably doesn't matter too much. So I don't think we need to be too harsh on the team or whatever for not taking any of their chances, which obviously might have changed the game. I think the first half, especially, and even until the 55th, maybe 60th minute or so, Dortmund were clearly a better side than Real Madrid in the Champions League final. That's as you mentioned earlier, that's not something you get a trophy for, but that's still a sign of quality, which for large parts of the season, I think even we very much questioned from this team. So that's something they deserve credit for, even if that's not something that you can put on, your letterhead or whatever.
Yeah, no, but it's still nice to have that at least. Dortmund also could have been completely destroyed from the first minute on, and that would have been that. You said in the preview that you did not want a shellacking, a little bit like let's say, I think the 4-0 loss to Bayern, where you concede an early corner and then it just downhill from there. That for sure did not happen, and I saw a lot of people talking about the Champions League final beforehand and how boring it's going to be, and I personally did not think it was a boring game. Was it the best Champions League final ever, especially from a footballing quality standpoint? Probably not, but still I thought it was a really good football game. It was exciting to watch, and there were a lot of marginal things, and obviously Dortmund did show that they also can play ball, so that was nice to see. Obviously, it's a shame that Dortmund didn't quite capitalize on that. I also wonder if the one chance where the referee blew a foul, which there wasn't one, I'm not sure if it was Mendy or where he made contact with Riasson, where he sort of stumbled over the leg of his own teammate and fell into I don't even remember who it was. Might have been Adeyemi, but it was a bit of a weird situation. But Riasson obviously broke open on the right wing and could have darted into the box, and that was sadly blown. That not sure if he could have picked out the right pass or not, but either way, this is certainly a situation that I want to see back. But not the biggest moment that probably would have changed the game that much, if I'm honest. And the other thing that annoyed me were obviously the two bookings for Schlotterbeck and Sabitzer, both for dissent. I don't know how you see it, but I thought that was a bit of a ref show kind of thing. I heard later that UEFA are testing the approach for the Euros, that only the team captain is allowed to speak to the referee. I don't know how you see that. I thought that was a little bit annoying, a bit of a pain, but it's also not as egregious as the non-sending off of Dante and Ribéry in the previous Champions League final where Dortmund participated in.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately it probably didn't matter too much. The entire refereeing performance wasn't great. I thought also the booking for Vinicius didn't make too much sense, because Kobel invited him to have a look, and then Kobel tried to sell it. Because I think they probably predetermined that Vinicius is a very emotional guy, and there might be an opening to get him sent off by an early booking, and then maybe involve in some discussions on the field later in the game or whatever. Obviously, there was the diving incident where some people and even parts of the German media are now, of the opinion that should have been a second yellow. But I mean, it's the Champions League final. Even if it's not Vinicius Junior and it's not Real Madrid, I mean, no player in the world is going to get sent off in the Champions League final for that. I mean, it was absolutely inconsequential at the sideline. So obviously, the bookings for Schlotterbeck and Sabitzer didn't make much sense in the context of the game, but it's not like either one of them, change their approach to the game in the second half or whatever. It's not like Schlotterbeck could have prevented a goal had he, put his sending off on the line, as it were. I mean, sort of the Hummels thing where he tried to handle the ball after Carvajal's header. I mean, that would have been an interesting situation, like Suarez versus Ghana in the 2010 World Cup.
I remember
that. I mean, obviously, me being a massive Hummels fan and wanting Dortmund to win for whatever strange reasons, I don't know if I would have coped very well, but from a neutral's perspective, I think the most interesting thing would have been if Hummels had saved that, as it were, and then Dortmund trying to hold on. Maybe Kobe saves the penalty, but I mean, obviously, that's all not very useful to think about. Ultimately, I think Dortmund mostly have themselves to blame. Also, on the one hand, for not taking the scoring opportunities in the first half, and then, I mean, I'm a bit annoyed that the two things I said before the game that can't happen did happen. I said don't concede easy goals off a set piece. That did happen, and don't give away silly goals. That also happened with Madsen. So a team, especially as the underdog against Real Madrid in the Champions League final, I think Matthias said last week they have to play the perfect game. They arguably did for, I don't know, 60 odd minutes, and then dumb set piece, dumb mistake. You don't win Champions League finals like that. It's pretty simple.
It's also very annoying because the build-up to the corner that led to the first goal, I think, was also a shot that would have gone nowhere, and I think Madsen just deflected it out of bounds, if I remember correctly. And that reminded me a little bit about the late equalizer of Leverkusen, where Duranville, I think it was, deflected the ball to a corner that was going nowhere, and then. I think it wasn't actually. No, that was a stupid foul.
Yeah, right.
That was a stupid foul.
There was a foul,
that
and
led to a free kick.
Then the free kick turned into a corner. Yeah. I mean,
but it gave me the same vibe.
It's a similar situation.
Yeah. So, yeah. Obviously, this is something to be really annoyed about because it's such a mediocre way to lose. Had Real Madrid just had an amazing combination, some ridiculous individual skill or so, that would have been one thing. But yeah, you're right, and I had to think of you right as the goal went in, because it's also such a Dortmund way to lose, because sad pieces is a word that is certainly in my vernacular when it comes to Borussia Dortmund set piece defending, and it bit us again. I don't know what to make of the fact that Real Madrid basically tried to hit the same corner routine 5 out of 6 times until then. Yeah, just overall very annoying that that is what it took to beat Dortmund and not a little bit more, because Real Madrid at that point, I feel like the game had just shifted a little bit into their favor, because Dortmund were showing fatigue a little bit, not really as clean anymore in their first touches, and being overrun and outpressed a little bit here and there, and so that happened. I mean, I don't know if we need to discuss the Füllkrug header he had in the second half. If he places that better, obviously it's a goal, but you could just feel that Dortmund putting in all the work they did for the first 60 minutes did give Real Madrid an advantage in the end, because they clearly didn't work as hard for it as the other team. Now, Lars, revisionist history, or, well, maybe that's not the right word, but it's time to begrudge or bemoan coaching decisions, if there are any. I'll say this. I would have brought on Malen instead of Royce for Adeyemi, because I liked the structure that Dortmund had, and I also liked a fast player that made life hard for Carvajal. And I felt like once Adeyemi was off, Carvajal had a little bit more freedom. I don't know if that led to him scoring the goal, but it certainly helped Real in having one more player further up front, and had their structure, if you will, to overpower Dortmund. So I'm not really happy with the substitution. I also personally thought, knowing how the last Champions League final went for Dortmund and how depleted and fatigued they were toward the end, that 2-3 fresh legs maybe, or fresh players rather, around the 60-65 minute mark will probably have helped. What are your thoughts on the substitutions that Dortmund did or didn't do?
I mean, I feel like there was an attempt maybe to, tempt fate or whatever with Reus. Because
it felt to me like it, yes.
Obviously, Reus has had, kind of a resurgence in terms of this season. Once his departure was announced, I mean, he had like 50% of his scoring contributions in the Bundesliga, I think, after that point, with the games against Augsburg and at Darmstadt mainly, or exclusively, I guess, because obviously they lost by 3-0 against Mainz. I don't know. Neither Reus nor Malen did anything of note as substitutes in this game. Maybe that was down to game state
I think it was.
With Reus coming on. How long was it? 4 or 5 minutes before the first goal, and then Malen came on when they were clearly reeling a bit from taking that knock. I don't know that. I mean, when you concede a set piece and make an individual mistake, I don't know that you can point out to any tactical decisions they made in that regard. I don't know that any substitution would have materially changed how Dortmund played at that point, because it's not like they had the absolute massive difference maker on the bench waiting to put his stamp on the game. What I will say is, and I've been harping on this point for basically years now, in the big games in the Champions League, whenever they didn't go too well, for example, when they lost at Man City from the John Stones screamer and Haaland's acrobatics. That was one game where they got the underdog game plan right down to a T, but they expended too much energy in the first 60 odd minutes, and they didn't have any runners to bring on to see out the game. And the same thing had happened a few times even during this great Champions League run, where I think if Mecha had any contributions to give to this team, or Salih Özcan, or I don't know who, just another runner, makes total sense to have that available in these kinds of games where that your players will have to give 120% and not 100 in order for you to have a chance. And I mean, to their credit, I think every single one of their players left everything on the pitch. I think outside of Madsen, who, I mean, that's just a bit unfortunate because he made the individual mistake, and he was also presumably the marker for Carvajal. So maybe he's the odd one out in a sense. But other than that, I find no actual fault in any individual performance, be that expenditure of energy, be that they're having the right mindset, or just even quality. So I think Brandt did very well. Hummels, Schlotterbeck were once again great. Kobel only had one slight wobble, if you like. I think Füllkrug did well. I mean, the entire you can go down the entire team with the possible exception of Madsen. So in a way, that's also why. I mean, it's also probably down to the fact that it's Thursday evening when we're talking about this, so the game is a bit in the rearview mirror. But I don't think this is going to live in our minds for nearly as long as the game against Bayern. Also because that was Bayern, but it's not like we have much to look back on in terms of the performance or refereeing decisions or whatever. It's just clearly the better team on the day was Dortmund for much of the game, but I don't think anyone can look at this game and say it's an absolute travesty that Dortmund didn't win. So they lost against arguably the best Champions League side of all time. I mean, you can obviously debate that with a few other teams from Real Madrid, but it doesn't really matter, does it? So, I mean, fair enough, I suppose, is my 2-word synopsis of the Champions League final. It just wasn't good enough. That's okay. That's football.
That annoys me a little bit, as you just said, is that Dortmund did not really get much out of players like Mecha, and so it feels like Dortmund still had a lot of untapped potential that they could have made more of in this game, but this season overall, obviously. So that's annoying me a little bit, since that's, you know, a 30 million euro signing and just contributes nothing. But yeah, and that being said, I thought Emre Can did really well in this game to play against Bellingham, because I thought Bellingham overall had a horrible game. And I'm a little bit annoyed that he wasn't punished for celebrating a little bit too early when Vinicius scored, because that bounce was also relatively lucky, and Kobe, I mean, it's hard to really save that, but it was still mighty close considering what a blunder that pass from Maatsen was. And yeah, I just feel bad for Maatsen. I have no animosity towards him. Obviously, him not being a good set piece defender is kind of obvious. And yeah, I mean, considering what a complex role he played, he tucked inside during build-up for most stretches of the game. Really complex role to just keep your concentration up for that long on really the highest level on that stage. Still being such a young and inexperienced player, I think overall he needs to be commended how much he has helped Dortmund in their structure, in their build-up play, and obviously he is maybe sometimes a little bit overrun on defense, but at least not for lack of trying, as with previous left backs. And offensively, I think he contributes, whether it be runs down the wings or as I just said, if he's more centrally involved in the grander build-up scheme. So yeah, obviously sad for him, and obviously I think we will all remember Karim Adeyemi's one-on-one, and yeah, it makes me at least appreciate Lars Ricken's goal of the century a little bit more, lobbing the keeper in the Champions League final, because it's funny, especially when you're a Dortmund player, this is the one thing you should be thinking of, but Adeyemi didn't, as you said, caught in between two minds.
Also, the situations were completely different. I mean,
they were,
Ricken was so far out and only came on 20 seconds before, and Dortmund were already winning the game by that point. So it's, I mean, just because it's a lob finish, that's not necessarily the thing that I immediately thought of, I have to say.
Well, that was my when I saw Hummels' pass and him breaking line, I instantly thought to myself, yeah, you gotta lob that now. First touch, ideally, but yeah, didn't work out that way. At least I in my presence of mind, that option was there. And yeah, shout out to Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, who unlocked his striker career or brought it to a new level once he figured out the lob for himself, because being a, as they kids say, or used to say, I don't even know, pace merchant in FIFA. He obviously also had a lot of 1v1 situation with the goalkeeper, and Courtois was pretty far off his line. So that, I think, certainly would have worked out, but I also am very aware that this is not an easy play, especially not at full speed, to lob the ball like that. But yeah, either way, I think Adeyemi really chose pretty much the worst option. Just keeping his momentum might have already had, considering how fast he is. But yeah, it is what it is, and as you said, fair enough. I do believe that Real Madrid in the end were classic Real Madrid, and yeah, Dortmund had very little to offer once they went a goal down. I mean, the offside goal from Füllkrug, yeah, I celebrated for half a second before I realized, yeah, that was probably offside. And yeah, Lars, what do you think will now happen to Dortmund's, I don't know, collective consciousness, or I don't know, inner spirit, or whatever you want to call it? Are Dortmund in in danger of becoming a team like Leverkusen or Tottenham or so. Mind you, Leverkusen obviously won 2 titles this season, but overall just, always being the bridesmaids? Or do you think there are a few more final and title losses in between that before Dortmund should have this, this loser energy about them?
I mean, as it pertains to Spurs, I think you should really ask Matthias if you're brave enough.
I don't know if I am.
I mean, I think the thing that differentiates Dortmund from those clubs, as you mentioned, is, from time to time they do pop up and win the DFB Pokal, for example, and at least they are making finals regularly. It's not like Tottenham are losing finals all the time. It's basically that
it's true.
They are, just not even a bridesmaid oftentimes. And also Leverkusen weren't in too many finals after the start of the century. It's in the last few years. I think Dortmund have lacked that absolute edge at the highest of levels. We've probably spent hours upon hours discussing why Bayern are very hard to beat in the Bundesliga over 34 match days, and obviously it happened this year with a Leverkusen side that Dortmund in most years wouldn't have been able to beat either. I think that's fair enough to say. I don't think losing a Champions League final against Real Madrid in the circumstances as they were changes too much for Dortmund. I think, if anything, the fact that they were able to hang with Real Madrid in the Champions League final, that they made the Champions League final after winning the Room of Death, eliminating Atletico and PSG, that should all be more encouragement than not being able to pull off the upset in the final should be discouraging. So in a way, I think the Champions League season, once they are able to look at it as a whole and not just with the disappointment of losing a final, I think that's more of a positive than a negative. The more interesting thing to me is, and I'm sure we are going to talk about it at another point in this summer, how much does the team change from what we saw in Wembley. I mean, we know that Reus is gone. I think it's pretty safe to say at this point that Hummels is probably also gone. Madsen and Sancho quite possibly not returning because their loans are ending, and I think it's inconceivable that both are at Dortmund on long-term deals next season, so maybe they're lucky and keep Madsen and maybe Sancho on loan, but I think the most likely scenario is that only one of those guys stays, and that's more likely than not to be going to be Madsen. And we've also already mentioned the lack of firepower off the bench, so they have some work to do there. So it's quite conceivable that a lot of squad turnover is going to happen. And I mean, going by some of the last few transfer windows, I don't know how optimistic most people will be thinking about that prospect. Obviously, they've changed their decision-making structure around a bit. Sven Mislintat, for all his faults, as first man in line, especially at Ajax, which obviously was a bit of a train wreck for a few months only, but even at Stuttgart, not all the decisions were absolutely foolproof in terms, especially of coaching hires and whatever. But there's no doubt about the ability of Sven Mislintat to identify talent. Some of this great Stuttgart team was assembled by him. He obviously worked at Dortmund before. I'm not going to go back into the Kagawa anecdote, but still, we know that Mislintat is good at identifying players, so there's some reason for optimism, I think, that they might be able to get back to a bit more of a opportunistic, courageous transfer strategy. And I mean, the thing is that the transfer market has basically become a year-round thing. It's a bit like the NFL in America now being outside of the 1 month in the summer. It's basically a year-long thing, even if they're not playing. And the equivalent, I think, is the transfer market. It's basically always going on, which is why people like, I don't know, Fabrizio Romano have, millions upon millions of followers. And I'm sure Dortmund are going to be quite interesting to follow this summer. Will we like all the decisions they make? Probably not, but it's better to be interesting than not to be interesting, I suppose.
Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, if I may add one quick point to my question beforehand, because I don't really think that Dortmund should be viewed as losers whatsoever, especially not after the Champions League final. Obviously, after the last year's Bundesliga campaign, maybe somewhat differently, but I think it's, as you said, it's super encouraging that Dortmund made the Champions League final, and considering Dortmund's resources and considering the I don't know, the resources of how many other teams in Europe that are completely towering in comparison to what Dortmund have financially. And as I said before, I don't even think that Dortmund really made the most out of their own potential. That all being said, if you then still manage to reach the Champions League final, to have memorable games like the ones against Atletico and PSG, and beat teams of absolute stars like PSG, and with the Dortmund team that maybe lacks those, I think this is super encouraging, especially looking forward and considering how European football has developed and is developing, that the fact that Dortmund still remains somewhat competitive. I mean, we had more than an outsider's chance to win the Champions League final. As we said beforehand, maybe it was 65-35, or it was certainly not 90-10 or 80-20 in terms of the winning probability, to me, going by how the game went. And so I think for Dortmund, this is an image boost, considering how well they played, and for maybe the message toward the club is actually trying to win the Champions League a little bit harder, but to not lose that as a possibility out of sight, if you will. Just to have the realization, Borussia Dortmund are a team that always has a chance, even if it's a very small one, to win the Champions League or to make a deep Champions League run. And I think this is a line of thinking that should inform decisions at the club going forward. That's all I'm going to say about that. In terms of season planning and squad planning, it's going to be really interesting what Dortmund do. If they're going to really try to go in an entirely different direction, with, as you said, maybe a few bolder moves, maybe more younger players again, trying to be a bit more cost effective after 30 million euros for Mecha, at least for now, seem to be thrown out. I don't know. I'm really intrigued to see where this is going. Now, Lars, I have to ask real quick, do you think in this entire revamp, if you will, as you said, Hummels is gone, probably Marco Reus definitely gone, Sancho and Maatsen also likely not going to return. Do you think that Dortmund will clean house a little bit more and even debate internally whether to fire Terzic and maybe hire Şahin or as a head coach, or do you think Terzic is definitely going to survive the much talked about season analysis, the Elefantenrunde?
I mean, I can't envision a scenario like the analysis that brought a premature end to the reign of Marco Rose at Dortmund. I think the situations are not very comparable. I think it would be a bit problematic, maybe even suicidal in the court of public opinion, to fire Edin Terzic after he led you into a Champions League final and had you on the verge of maybe winning that game. I think there's a non-zero chance, especially because there's a lot of reports of how highly he's regarded in England. Obviously, he worked as assistant to Slaven Bilic at West Ham. He speaks English very well. He's made a name for himself in the Champions League, which is huge in England and English speaking, the English speaking part of football world. So I don't think there's no scenario whatsoever in which Edin Terzic gets a great opportunity at another club and goes to Dortmund and says, "Hey, do you want to match that? Do I have your confidence for the next 3 years?" And I don't know that necessarily Dortmund are going to say right now, yes, we are hitching our wagons to you as our front man or whatever, because I think they are the bosses, as if you will be quite aware of the danger of letting the Champions League campaign cloud their judgment over what was ultimately an almost entirely unacceptable Bundesliga season. Because not only coming in fifth, which is the second worst finish since before the first Klopp title, but also they had the second fewest points in that time span. The points towards Leverkusen were, was it 29 or so, completely unacceptable. A lot of the performances completely unacceptable. So it's not like, making the Champions League final exonerates your head coach from what was otherwise a pretty pedestrian season at best. And because we can also look at the cup, in which, as Mats Hummels will remind you probably, they completely shit the bed against Stuttgart. So yeah, I think there's a non-zero chance that Terzic, goes out of his way to see what's out there on the market, and then maybe they agree to part ways. But there's not going to be a firing of the head coach. And the question to me is Nuri Sahin so highly rated that you cannot afford to lose him, because he seems to have some opportunities in other leagues. I think he was mentioned at Feyenoord, who lost Arne Slot to Liverpool, right? I'm sure he was mentioned for vacancies in Turkey, which I think have now all been filled with Mourinho and Van Bronckhorst at Besiktas, if I read that correctly today. It's Nuri Sahin who doesn't even have the pro license at this point. I think he's going to get it later this year, but still, he doesn't, as far as I know, have the...
I'll answer that for you. No, I don't think he is that valuable for Dortmund that they absolutely need to hold on to him, because he is still a very young coach, and if he goes somewhere else and gets more experience there and reveals himself as to be the next generational talent as a head coach, then I'm sure there will be a way for him to find himself back to the sideline of the Borussia Dortmund dugout. So I personally have no I have no pain of seeing Nuri Sahin go as a coaching talent, because if it's true, then I think Dortmund will manage to benefit from that in one way or another sooner or later. And as it comes to Terzic, maybe that scenario where he gets a different offer and wants to do something else, and there's sort of a mutual agreement, can of course happen, but I currently don't see that happening. And I personally am wondering how Terzic is going to what he's going to learn from this particular season, because on the one hand, very successful Champions League campaign, on the other hand, atrocious Bundesliga campaign, considering what Dortmund's potential is as a club, and how much money they have, and the quality in that team certainly was obviously maybe not the best Dortmund team ever, but still I think a team that can allow you to finish higher than fifth for sure. So we talk about how Terzic is still a very young coach, and he is gaining a lot of experience. I just wonder if and what he will change, and what the club will adjust to make up for such a terrible season, or if anything, maybe he won't learn much, and we just really need to move on to a different coach. I have no idea, but it is certainly something I think when you really talk about this season, it needs to be discussed whether you want to continue with Terzic and whether you have a long-term vision with him, because if you don't, then it's obviously tricky to continue. But at the same time, you also need to have a alternative lined up that really makes sense. Otherwise, you can't let go of Terzic either. But obviously, when we talk about remaining players and maybe an access, I think you have Kobel, you have Schlotterbeck, you have Sabitzer, you have Brandt. These are certainly all players you can build on. Same with Riasson on the right side. Certainly a very solid player. I obviously don't know what the long-term future of Daniel Malen is, but certainly a player you are happy to continue with as well. Now, Lars, obviously I left Emre Can out of this. Obviously he is playing in a very key position, but if you had to restructure this Dortmund team going into the new season, what would your approach be, and what other players that Dortmund currently hold you would plan around, sort of?
I mean, Stefan, it's almost as if you read my I don't know, 2,000 or so word piece on the transfer market of Dortmund this season, because I mentioned Kobel, Schlotterbeck, Sabitzer and Brandt as the pillars to build around, and obviously I think that's not necessarily an opinion that is groundbreaking or whatever, because that's just the way this season has unfolded. Those were the players for the most part. I think Sabitzer had some growing pains in after his move from Bayern. Who performed the best, regardless of circumstances and all that. So I think those four are all set, and then I think you could put Riasson in a bracket just below that, because I think if everything else was absolutely perfect, I think you might be looking at upgrading to a right back with a bit more quality on the ball, but he does everything well at a level that is very useful.
Lukas Piszczek has taught me that even if you are not the very best right back on the ball, even though Lukas Piszczek obviously worlds better on the ball than Riasson, I still think that he does so many other things on an extremely high level that it's not going to be that easy to find a better right back, even if it's a footballing upgrade. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of making the same argument with other words. I think it's very hard to do better for a club like Dortmund, and obviously they have so many question marks to erase that there's no question that Riasson is going to be their starting right back next season, and the only reason why he wouldn't be their starting right back is because he might be needed on the left. So but then beyond those five, it gets a bit tricky. I think Füllkrug is maybe in a similar bracket to Riasson, because he's not, at the absolute top level for a club, that wants to be Bundesliga champions at some point in the near future and wants to make noise repeatedly in the Champions League. But he's obviously a very useful player, great for the dressing room, basically sort of met all my expectations when they signed him late in August. But obviously they seem to have identified Zero Guirassy from Stuttgart as someone who might give them a bit more of an attacking edge, a bit more of a well-rounded attacking player who's also just been on a scoring tear for Stuttgart over the last two seasons, especially this season, obviously, and he's available on a very favorable deal, because he's got a release clause for Bundesliga sides that's 18 to 20 million from what I gather. So that's basically a no-brainer if they can get that done. And as
would he fit stylistically into Dortmund's and especially Terzic's system, who likes a back-to-wall striker?
I mean, ultimately, strikers who score goals fit in every system. I think that's one of the more overblown discussions they've had. I mean, it's not like Girassi is Mukoko in terms of hold-up play because he is a number 9. He's faster than Füllkrug, which lends itself to a bit more depth. I think he'd be fine in pretty much every system. The question you would have is more, is he a product of Stuttgart, because he obviously made another jump under Sebastian Hoeneß this season, but he also had pretty good numbers last season when he was first signed by Mislintat, which is also why I think he's.
I'll say this from the. I actually watched him a lot this season, and I'm not really that concerned about him being elevated by a Stuttgart system, which obviously is a thing that's true because Stuttgart were definitely better than the sum of their parts, but nevertheless, I think individually he is extremely good striker, and I'm right there with you. I think he will score a ton of goals for Dortmund, and when we look at what Dortmund lacked this season, especially in the Bundesliga, I think scoring goals is one of those aspects. So I think he will be able to raise that number a little bit more to where it was before this season. So it would be a good transfer in my book.
Yeah. And because you mentioned Emre Can earlier, I think if I had, if I were part of the triumvirate and had some say in Dortmund's transfer business, I'm not sure I would necessarily try my absolute damnedest to keep both Maatsen and Sancho, because Maatsen, for all his quality, has also had quite a few problematic moments, let's say, defensively, and it's not like he's an absolute child. I mean, he's been around a bit. He's been loaned out by Chelsea quite a bit, so you wonder at least a little bit if that's just who he is defensively, and if you can live with that and all the time. And in terms of Sancho, I think finding.
I know 2 seasons of these kind of mistakes and it stops being cute.
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
I mean that is very true. I mean, how often did we talk about Guerrero, who I think attacking wise was even better than Maatsen is at this point, and always scored great goals. Guerrero did, and how often did we talk about it? But he's a defensive liability, and obviously he also had some physical injuries and all that. The thing with Sancho is, I think in today's day and age, filling the winger spots has become reasonably easy. I think they can also expect another jump from Jamie Bino-Gittens. Maybe Duranville doesn't get injured for an entire season a third time in a row, so maybe you can count on that. So I'm not sure. I mean, obviously it's not very popular among Dortmund fans, but I'm not sure I would try super hard to keep Sancho, especially given how his wages at Man United are absurd for Dortmund perspective. Which is all a long prelude to say that my biggest transfer focus would actually be in defensive midfield. Because
that makes 2 of us.
Because Emre Can, I think, deserves a lot of credit for the Champions League season, which served him to a T, because that's the kind of player he is. He's the leader for an underdog side, where he can be physical, make the odd cynical foul, and have some deep possession, but not be asked too much on the ball. But, it's quite apparent that he's not good enough to be Dortmund's lead defensive midfielder and for 40 or so of their 50 odd matches during a season. So maybe they can rectify what ultimately was arguably a mistake in not signing Edson Alvarez last season. I haven't watched him too closely at West Ham to see if he would have solved all the issues, but just if I had any say in it, I would try my hardest to find a defensive midfielder who's better on the ball, who doesn't make as many mistakes as Emre Can, and that would be my my focus and also where I would probably invest the most money.
No, I'm right there with you, because especially since Dortmund are lucky that at least Sabitzer worked out extremely well. Sort of forming a double eight together with Julian Brandt, pairing them up with a more strategic number 6, if that makes sense. I think then you have an amazing core midfield, actually, and something you can really build around for, I don't know, let's say 2, 3, 4 seasons or so, if things work out well, and if you don't sign someone that goes through the roof to the extent that you are selling him after 2 seasons. So yeah, I'm right there with you. Now, if you ask me what player I'm thinking of, I am drawing a blank because I simply don't know a good candidate that Dortmund could sign for this position currently. I don't watch enough world football, but I'm sure there will be someone somewhere out there that would happily play for Dortmund and has the qualities that Dortmund need, or at least that Dortmund can develop. So yeah, I don't know if you have anyone in mind that could help.
No.
So yeah, we'll see, but I think it's okay for us to leave it here. There's plenty more to discuss. The Yellow Wall Pod Season Awards coming up next week, hopefully with Matthias having settled into his new home in Wisconsin. So, yeah, Lars, thank you very much for coming on. I know it was not the easiest and the most fun episode to record, but, just for the annals of time, I guess we have done it now. And everyone else out there who has listened to us throughout the season, a massive thank you. And I hope you still enjoyed the season for a lot of great moments that still for sure happened. And hopefully there will be a few better moments next season, maybe even a little bit of silverware to make up for it. But I already told my wife, if Dortmund stay true to themselves now, they also need to lose the DFB Pokal final next year. But yeah, anyway, Lars, do you have any final thoughts before we get out of here?
Just maybe mention that we are going to talk eventually about the Rheinmetall sponsoring. We're not dodging or evading that topic. It just didn't fit today.
Yes. Yeah, maybe there needs a season award of worst sponsor behind 1 und 1. Anyway, as always, everyone out there, thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you on the flip side. Goodbye.